History at times flows silently and deeply, much like the dark blue waters of the Bosphorus. That day was the day the tears of one of the 21st century's most powerful leaders fell like droplets into those same waters. In the panoramic conference room of one of Istanbul's most magnificent hotels, seemingly suspended above the clouds, time itself seemed to have stopped. Outside, cars streamed across the bridges, connecting Asia and Europe, while inside, the destinies of two continents. Two worlds and two men were becoming intertwined. Everything was part of a flawless display of power. The polished mahogany table, without a single speck of dust, resembled a frozen lake upon which strategies were about to collide. The water glasses, placed with millimeter precision, the flags, each standing like a silent sentinel, and the tense, expectant hum that even the air conditioning couldn't suppress. This was the world of President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan, and he was its master. In his mind, like a grandmaster surveying a chessboard, he was assessing the map of Africa, ports, military bases, soft power operations conducted by Tika and the Diyanet, the shifting military balances due to the sale of unmanned aerial vehicles. Everything was a part of his great dava, his cause, his vision to reposition Turkey at the very center of the historical stage. He was not merely the leader of a country, he was the standard-bearer of a civilization, the thunderous voice of the oppressed, the race. This meeting was to be another move in that grand game, an entirely predictable meeting with the young leader of Burkina Faso, which would likely conclude with some financial aid and a promise of strategic cooperation. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré entered the room, all calculations, all strategies, momentarily lost their meaning. Traoré, unlike the Western leaders in their sharp, dark suits, wore a flowing bubu in the colors of the earth, carrying the spirit of his people. His steps were a whisper on the marble floor. He didn't command the room with noise, but with a profound stillness that seemed to absorb all sound around it. His face held the ancient wisdom of Africa and the fire of a young revolutionary all at once. The moment of the handshake arrived. Erdogan's hand, hardened by years of political struggle, the hand that had built a nation, grasped Traoré's hand was warm, calloused from knowing the earth. But it carried an electricity that Erdogan's political radar could not classify. In that instant, the seasoned leader within Erdogan paused. There was something about this man he could not decipher. They took their seats. The first few minutes unfolded as expected. Formal pleasantries, the mechanical voices of the translators, the rustling of papers from the advisors. Just as Erdogan was about to steer the conversation toward economic cooperation, Traoré fell silent. He let his gaze wander for a moment. Across the opulent decor of the room, the crystal chandeliers, the priceless view of the Bosphorus, then, his eyes locked onto Erdogan's like a nail driven into wood. In that moment, even the red lights of the cameras seemed to dim. A storm was raging in Traoré's inner world. God, he prayed, give me the right words, words that can pierce this man's armor and reach his heart. Give me the strength to make him hear the silent scream of my people. He knew this was his only chance, a chance to bypass protocol, politics, and all the artificial layers, and to speak directly to the man. He took a deep breath and cast the first stone onto the center of that frozen lake of a table. His voice was as low as a whisper, but as heavy as a mountain. Mr. President, with your forgiveness, I wish to ask a question. Have you ever, with your entire being, truly felt what it means to start life with absolutely nothing, and yet be forced to carry the weight of everything a nation, a hope, the prayers of millions? The question fell like a burning ember into the room. Erdogan's first reaction was the defense mechanism of a leader. Is this a tactic? A psychological move? A narrative of victimhood of the kind the Western media adores? He tried to cling to this thought, for this was the world he knew, the one he understood. But when he looked into Traoré's eyes, that thought evaporated into nothing. There was no cunning in those eyes, no calculation. There was only the pure, simple, questioning truth of a continent and its people who had suffered for centuries. In that instant, the fortress in Erdogan's mind fell. His political armor cracked, and through that crack, his own past began to seep in. The smell of wet asphalt after the rain in Kasımpaşa, the scent of coal smoke, the texture of his mother's wool headscarf, his father's tired but undefeated eyes, the leader, Erdoğan, retreated, and in his place emerged Recep Tayyip, the boy who grew up on those streets, who had dreams, who raged against injustice. The weight that settled on his heart was no longer the strategic responsibility of a state, but the weight of a human soul and its accountability, Traoré. As if seeing the storm in Erdogan's silence, let a river of words flow, like that of a storyteller. But the story he told was not a fairy tale. It was the reality of millions, written in blood and tears. "My mother's name was Hope," he began, "but she had very little to hope for in her life. She would rise before the sun and dig at the cracked barren earth with her bare hands until sunset, just to find us a piece of cornbread. In the evenings, she would watch the sanctity of that single morsel passing down our throats as we sat around that one bowl of soup. She would not eat. A tired smile would be on her face, but I knew the hunger that was gnawing at her stomach. Behind that smile, night, I would hear her whispered prayers as we slept. She never asked God for palaces or riches. Her only prayer was that her children might one day live in a country where human dignity was not a luxury, but a birthright, a country where they would not lay their heads on their pillows hungry." The story pierced the heart of everyone in the room like an arrow. Yukar Bey, the most cynical veteran journalist in the room, slowly placed his pen on the table. He had forgotten to take notes. In that moment, he was not a journalist. He was a son. The president's young female advisor gave up trying to stop the tears flowing from her eyes, because she realized that everyone in the room was drowning in the same sea. Erdoğan could no longer contain himself. His shoulders began to shake. He was a man who knew the sanctity of mothers, a man raised with the belief that paradise lies at the feet of mothers. The story of Traoré's mother was the story of his own mother. It was the story of millions of mothers in Anatolia. Traoré paused, then looked deeper into Erdoğan's eyes, into the most vulnerable corner of his soul. "Today, as a leader, I look into the eyes of those same children, eyes that shine with hunger but can still smile at you with hope. And every night when I lay my head on my pillow in that luxurious palace, I ask myself, am I truly doing enough for them? Am I worthy of my mother's whispered prayers? Will history remember me as the leader who built a third bridge over the Bosphorus, or as the man who built a bridge of hope to a broken heart?" That was the final blow. The ocean within Erdoğan finally broke through the dams he had maintained for years. The tears that had gathered in his eyes first showed resistance. The voice in his head said, "Do not cry, you are a leader, you must be strong." But his heart rebelled against that voice. The first tear streamed down his cheek like a betrayal. Those that followed were an expression of surrender, of purification. He tried to swallow the lump that had formed in his throat. His voice, when it came, was broken by sobs. my brother, what have you done to me tonight?" "What have you done?" He buried his head in his hands. His shoulders shook. We worked day and night to raise this nation, this country, to its feet. We built a cause of concrete and steel. We filled the skies with iron eagles. We reached out to the oppressed at the other end of the world. But you just asked me about the soul of that concrete, the heart of that steel. In this rush, in this great struggle, did we forget the child at the beginning of the road? The true reason for our cause, the human being. May God forgive us. May He forgive us. This was not a moment of a leader's weakness. This was the moment of a human being's greatest strength, the moment of confronting the truth. This was a confession, a repentance, a public reckoning before millions. Traoré stood up, not with authority, but as one would approach a wounded friend. He walked over to Erdoğan and placed a hand on his shaking shoulder. "Pain is the language that connects us. Mr. President, power builds walls. But a shared pain can demolish even the thickest of them," he said, and he told another story. The story of a single loaf of bread left in the middle of more than 20 children, and the oath he took as he ate his own, almost non-existent piece. "If I ever have power, no child will ever yearn for a morsel of bread like this again." Erdoğan lifted his tear-streaked face. Traoré's words had touched upon one of the deepest codes of his own culture. He who sleeps full while his neighbor is hungry is not one of us. In that moment, the scorched earth of Burkina Faso and the The fertile lands of Anatolia were united around the same belief, the same lesson of humanity. He stood up. The protocol, the advisors, the cameras, they had all lost their meaning. He embraced Traoré. This was not the diplomatic hug of two leaders posing for cameras. This was the embrace of two fathers, two sons, two brothers crushed under the weight of their cause. Today, there were not two presidents at this table. My brother Erdoğan whispered, his voice still ragged. Today, there were two human beings at this table, and one reminded the other of the beginning of the road, of why his heart beats, of why this cause was forged in blood and sweat. May God be pleased with you. When Traoré pulled back, his own eyes were glistening. Perhaps true leadership, he said, is to reach the end of the road without losing the heart you had at the beginning. That day, no treaties or official communiques came out of that room. What spread from that room to the world was a story of a bridge built from heart to heart, a story that melted all the cold logic of politics with the purest, warmest form of humanity. After escorting Traoré out, Erdoğan remained in his chair for a long time. His gaze was lost in the endless blue of the Bosphorus, which he no longer saw as a strategic waterway. He saw a timeless river, just like the river of humanity, that had just flowed through the room, covering even hearts of stone with moss. And everyone who lived that moment knew that the seed of sincerity planted that day would, in the future, grow creations more lasting than the grandest projects, more powerful than the strongest armies. Because on that day, it was not power that had won, it was mercy.